When a man steps back into the noisy world, but his heart never leaves home, what does love look like then? Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we'll explore a quiet, heartfelt story of responsibility, tenderness, and the small gestures that define real love. Quang returning to work, yet carrying Linda in every thought. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss our next videos. Quang woke before the alarm, lying still for a moment so he wouldn't disturb Linda. The room was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. She slept on her side, one hand resting on her stomach as if it belonged there now. He watched her breathe, then slid out of bed carefully and moved through his morning routine like he was trying not to crack the peace. The suit on the closet door looked like it belonged to a different life. He pulled on a white shirt, buttoned it, then reached for his tie. The knot came out crooked. He tried again. Still wrong. He was frowning at it when he heard a small voice behind him. "You're doing it too fast," Linda said. He turned. She stood in the doorway in an oversized cardigan, hair messy, eyes sleepy but warm. Seeing her like that made the office version of him feel distant already. "The tie is being difficult," he said. She walked up, close enough that he could smell the shampoo in her hair. "Let me." He lowered his chin. Linda's fingers undid the knot and tied it again in one smooth motion. She straightened his collar and stepped back. "There," she said. "Now you look like you." Quang's gaze softened. "Which me?" "The one who can handle meetings," she said, then smiled. "But I like the one who makes breakfast too." He reached for her hand. "I'll be back before dinner." Linda nodded, her thumb rubbing lightly over his knuckles. "Eat something. Don't forget water." He almost laughed. "You're saying that to me now?" "Someone has to," she said. "CEO doesn't mean invincible." Quang leaned in and kissed her forehead, slower than he needed to, because he wanted the moment to last. "If you feel dizzy, call me. If you feel anything, call me." "I'm at home," she murmured, amused. He still looked serious. "That's the point. I want you safe." At the door, he paused with his hand on the handle. Linda stood in the hallway watching him, not waving, just holding his face in her eyes like she was saving it for later. "Drive safe," she said. "I will," he answered and left before he could talk himself into staying. Outside, the morning air was cool. The car felt too quiet without her voice. He drove through traffic, the city waking up around him, and tried to switch his mind into work mode. He could do it. He always had. But the thought of Linda alone at home kept tapping at the edges of everything. The company lobby smelled like coffee and polished stone. People greeted him, respectful. His assistant met him at the elevator with a quick list. Quang nodded, moving through it without wasting words. In meetings, he was steady. He asked direct questions, made decisions, signed what needed signing. It was familiar, almost automatic. Still, in the small pauses, his hand went to his phone. He sent a message. "Are you up?" A few minutes later, her reply appeared. "Yes, making oatmeal." His shoulders loosened. "Good. Add fruit. Drink water," he typed. Her response came back fast. "Yes, boss." He smiled, small and private, and tucked the phone away. By late afternoon, his calendar finally cleared. Quang signed the last paper, handed it back, and stood. His body wasn't tired from work. It was tired from being away. In the parking garage, he called Linda. She answered on the second ring. "Hi." "Hi," he said, and the sound of her voice eased him. "How are you?" okay, she said. I took a nap. I missed you a little. Quang blinked. I missed you more. That's not possible, she teased. It is, he said. I'm leaving now. I'm going to make a stop first. A stop for what? You'll see, he said. Do you need anything? I need you to come home, she answered. I'm on my way, he said. He didn't drive straight home. He pulled into a small boutique that sold comfortable maternity clothes. Inside, the lighting was warm, the music quiet. He felt out of place in his suit. A woman behind the counter smiled. Can I help you? Something soft for my wife, Quang said. Light colors. She handed him 2 pieces and asked his wife's size. Quang guessed, then admitted he wasn't sure. The woman didn't laugh. She just helped him choose. Calm and practical. He paid, took the bag, and left, feeling oddly relieved. Next, he stopped at the bakery Linda liked and bought the lemon cakes she always said tasted like sunshine. The box felt warm in his hands, like it carried a little happiness. On the way back to the car, he passed a tiny baby shop. He slowed, then stopped. In the window, a pair of knitted booties sat on a small pillow, barely larger than his palm. For a moment, he just stood there, chest quiet. He went inside and bought the booties and a small plush rabbit, simple and white. The clerk wrapped them carefully, and Quang held the package like it was a future. When he finally drove home, the sky had turned warm gold. The bags rustled softly on the passenger seat with every turn. The scent of sugar filled the car. The lights were on when he pulled into the driveway. Relief washed over him before he even stepped out. He grabbed everything in one trip and walked to the front door. Linda opened it before he could knock. Her hair was tied up now, cheeks a little flushed from the warmth inside. Her eyes went straight to the bags, then back to him. You bought a lot, she said. Quang lifted one shoulder. I might have overdone it. Linda stepped aside, and the warmth of the house wrapped around him. He set the bags on the table and stood there for a second, taking in the soft lamplight and the faint smell of dinner. Linda came close and wrapped her arms around his waist, careful but firm. Quang dropped his hands to her back, holding her like he'd been holding his breath since morning. He kissed the top of her head and stayed there. Welcome home, she murmured. I'm home, he said. She pulled back enough to look at him. Show me. Quang nodded, and together they moved to the table, the day settling into quiet. Linda took the bag from his hands and sat at the table, easing herself into the chair. She reached inside and pulled out the first item, unfolding it slowly. The fabric slipped through her fingers, light and soft. She lifted it against her chest and smiled, not wide, just real. It's comfortable, she said. You actually picked something comfortable? Quang shrugged, but his eyes stayed on her face. The woman at the store helped. I told her you don't like anything tight. Linda looked up at him. You pay attention. I try, he said. She folded the clothing neatly and set it aside, then reached for the next bag. When she opened the bakery box, the smell of lemon filled the kitchen. It was familiar, grounding. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. You remembered this too. I remember a lot of things, Quang said. I just don't always say them out loud. They shared the cake without plates, standing close at the counter. Linda broke off small bites, savoring them. Quang watched her eat, the way she closed her eyes for a second like the taste anchored her. This makes the day feel complete, she said. He nodded. That's how it felt buying it. After they ate, Quang Quang washed his hands and reached for the last small package. He didn't give it to her right away. He held it, turning it once in his palm as if deciding something. Linda noticed. "What is it?" "It's nothing big," he said. "I just saw it." He handed it to her. Linda unwrapped it carefully, her movements instinctively gentle. The tiny booties rested in her hands, smaller than anything she'd held before. The plush rabbit followed, white and simple. She stared at them for a long moment. Then she looked at Quang. Her eyes were quiet, full in a way that didn't need tears. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. "I know," he answered. "But when I saw them, I thought about coming home, about you waiting, about this not being abstract anymore." Linda leaned into him, her head against his shoulder. He felt her exhale, slow and steady. "It's already real to me," she said. "But seeing you hold it like that, it means something." He wrapped his arm around her. "I didn't want you to feel alone today." "I didn't," she said. "But I missed you." "I missed you too," he said, and meant it in a way that surprised even him. They left the gifts on the table and moved into the kitchen. Quang insisted on clearing up, and Linda didn't argue much. She dried one dish, then paused, resting her weight against the counter. "Sit," he said, noticing. "Please." She gave in, walking back to the couch. Quang finished quietly, rinsing plates, stacking them with care. When he joined her, he brought a glass of water and set it within reach. "You don't need to hover," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "I just don't want to miss anything." She smiled. "You're here. That's not missing." They settled into the couch together. Linda leaned back, her legs stretched across his lap. Quang adjusted the cushion behind her without being asked. His hand rested on her stomach, warm and still, like it had learned where it belonged. The house felt different at night, slower. The outside world dimmed, leaving only soft lamplight and familiar shadows. "I had a lot to do today," Quang said. "But every time there was a pause, I thought about how you were doing here." "What did you imagine?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "That you were moving carefully, that you were bored for a bit, that you probably forgot to drink enough water." She laughed. "I did forget once." He raised his eyebrows. "See?" Linda shifted slightly, turning her head toward him. "You don't have to carry everything, work and home and all of it." "I know," he said, "but I want to carry this part." She reached for his hand, guiding it so his palm rested more firmly. "This part will carry you too," she said. He let the silence settle after that. It wasn't heavy, it was full. Later, Linda grew tired. It showed in the way her words slowed, in the small sighs she let out when she shifted positions. Quang noticed every sign. "Let's get you to bed," he said. "I'm not fragile," she murmured, but she let him help her stand. In the bedroom, the lights were low. Quang moved at her pace, never rushing. He helped her change, steadying her when she needed it. There was no awkwardness, no urgency, just care. They lay down side by side. Quang turned off the lamp, leaving only a faint glow from the hallway. Linda rolled onto her side, facing him. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "Today was long," she said. "It was," he agreed. "But it was good," she added. He nodded. "It was." She rested her hand on his chest, feeling the slow rhythm beneath it. "You don't come home like this before," she said. "Not tired in this way." "I'm tired differently now," he said. "It's not just from work." Linda listened, then smiled faintly. "I like this tired." "So do I," he said. They stayed awake a little longer, not talking much. The day loosened its grip on them, inch by inch. Outside, the night was quiet. Before sleep took her, Linda whispered, "Thank you for coming back today." Quang pressed his forehead to hers. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." They drifted off together, bodies close, the room holding them without demand. Nothing felt rushed, nothing felt uncertain, just a steady sense of being where they were meant to be.
Linda theo bà và cậu cháu ra nương mía. Dưới nắng sớm, bà vừa chặt mía vừa kể chuyện ngày xưa. Dậy chặt 3 hoặc 4 khúc cho đẹp để bán được giá. Đồng mía cao dần, 45 đồng trở thành hy vọng cho phiên chợ. Một cây mía đổ bất ngờ khiến cả nhóm kêu, rồi cười xòa vì kịp đỡ nhau. Chiều xuống, Linda buồn bã vì con rúi của mình đã biến mất. Nghi có kẻ trộm rình quanh nhà. CEO Quang ghé đến lắng nghe và trấn an và tự sửa chiếc camera cũ trong kho, kéo dây lắp trước sân nhà để bảo vệ cô. Đêm đến, Linda nấu cơm nếp cẩm mời anh ở lại ăn. Hai người trò chuyện lòng ấm lại. Quang kể áp lực công ty, camera nháy sáng, bóng lạ thoáng qua, và không biết Linda có sống sót qua được đêm nay không. Mọi người nếu thấy video hay, hãy cho mình một like, một subscribe. Cảm ơn mọi người nhé.